Here's chapter 13 on the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so there's going to be 4 parts, but I think only 2 parts. Only the first 2 are in this section, I'm pretty sure. So part 1, so peripheral nervous system is your, like the rest of your body that's not your brain and spinal cord, all your nerves, and this helps you interact with the outside body or outside world. And so part 1 is sensory receptors, part 2 is transmission lines, which is where the nerves are conducting those impulses, and then motor endings and motor activity, that's your muscles working and responding, and reflex activity is reflexes that don't have to go to the brain. Okay, so we already did central nervous system. So peripheral nervous system deals with sensory and motor, right? So sensory is afferent, motor is efferent, it's alphabetical, and oops, I just skipped a slide. And so we'll break down those different parts about sensory and motor. So first, sensory, this is sensing the environment, internal and external environment. So awareness of stimulus is called sensation. And then when we interpret that, it's called perception. We classify the receptors by either the type of stimulus, where they are in the body, or their complexity. So these are different types of receptors. You have mechanoreceptors. Those respond to touch, pressure, vibration, stretch. So you can think of like mechanical. And then thermoreceptors are, as you probably guessed, temperature. Photoreceptors are your eye, and those are light. And then chemoreceptors respond to chemicals like taste and smell. And then nociceptors are a different type of receptor, and they respond to pain. So, sorry, I'm sneezing. Oh my gosh. They respond to extreme heat or cold, and they that stimulates a pain response. Oops, I keep clicking. Or excessive pressure, things like that. You also have exteroreceptors. Those are outside of the body on your skin, and they detect touch, pain, pressure, or temperature. And then interoreceptors, these are inside of your body. These determine if something's going on inside your body, like chemical changes, tissue stretch, temperature changes. So if you are having internal pain, it could be because these are stimulated. Proprioceptors help your body kind of know where it's at, where it's located, and what your body is doing. So this tells you, like, if your muscles are stretching or moving, your tendons, joints, ligaments, connective tissue, all of those, like what they're doing. So your body has that information about where your body is, where the parts of your body are located and what they're doing. Okay, then you have different structures. There's simple receptors, and then there's the specialized ones. So those are the 2 categories. Simple receptors are modified dendritic endings, and they're all over the body. And then the specialized receptors are like your senses, like your other senses. Vision, hearing, equilibrium, smell, taste. These are complex organs. We will cover them later. Okay, so general senses are touch, pressure, stretch, vibration, temperature, pain, muscle sensing. Different receptors can detect multiple stimuli, so they're capable of kind of being adaptable to different stimuli. There's either non-encapsulated free nerve endings or encapsulated ones. They're not free. So the non-encapsulated are really common in the epithelia and connective tissues. Most of them don't have a myelin sheath, and they have little knob-like swellings at the end. This is like what your typical nerve looks like, except without the myelin. And these respond to temperature, pain, or light touch. So they're in your skin. Thermoreceptors are non-encapsulated free nerve endings. So these detect different temperatures depending on what kind of receptor they are. So your cold receptors detect between 10 to 40 degrees Celsius. And notice that that's Celsius, not Fahrenheit, so that's different. And then heat receptors detect from 32 to 48. Celsius, so that's really pretty hot. 40 degrees Celsius is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And then 10 is like cold water, and then 40 is pretty hot. So if it's outside of that range, it's going to be interpreted as pain. The nociceptors are activated, and it's painful. So think of that when you're really, really cold or really, really hot. Outside of these ranges, it's pain. It's painful. So nociceptors are pain receptors for extreme temperatures, pinching, damaged tissue, like capsaicin and red peppers. They respond to pH. They're also itch receptors. I think that's what's going on with my nose right now with histamine. So that's where nociceptors come in. And then there's also tactile Merkel discs. These are light touch receptors. So when you feel like a hair on your skin and you can feel it somewhere there, or a cobweb and you can't quite find it, those are the light touch receptors. And then hair follicle receptors, those are when your hairs, like on your arms, are touched, then they can feel that. So each hair has those hair follicle receptors. So here's the nerve ending ones, the free nerve endings, modified free nerve endings like Merkel cells, hair follicle receptors, they can feel when your hair moves. Okay, then the encapsulated ones, almost all of them are in connective tissue. There's lots of different types. One type is the Meissner corpuscle or tactile corpuscle. These involve discriminative touch, so they're like kind of more sensitive. They're found right below the skin, on your fingertips. They can distinguish different things. They're more, I don't want to say sensitive, but they're more detailed, I guess. And then lamellar Pacinian corpuscles, they respond to deep pressure. So if you have pain deeper or pressure, you can feel pressure. Those are your Pacinian corpuscles. And then you can also respond to vibration. Then you have bulbous corpuscles, the Ruffini endings. They respond to deep and continuous pressure. You have muscle spindles that respond to muscle stretch. You have a tendon organ that can feel tendon stretching, and joint kinesthetic receptors that can determine where your joints are. So those are all other receptors that are important to us. So here's a picture of a bunch of them. So study them, look at the pictures, and then their functions and body locations. All of these tables are really helpful. Okay, sensory processing. Now, once we get that sensory information, we have to do something with it. So sensation is the awareness of that stimuli. And then perception is the interpretation of it. Like you have to actually do something with that information. So you have a somatosensory system. This is the part of your sensory system that serves like your main body, trunk, and limbs. You get information from exteroceptors, proprioceptors, and interoceptors, and then it's relayed up to your brain for processing. There's 3 levels. There's receptor level, which your sensory cells are receiving the information. There's the circuit level, where it starts processing and moving up the chain, and then the perceptual level, where your brain is actually processing the information. Okay. So here's the 3 steps. Let's see. You've got your free nerve endings, muscle spindle. Look, that's the receptor area in your joints. And then it moves up to these interneurons, and that's your circuit level. And remember the thalamus, that's the switchboard. And then you go into the motor cortex, which is where it's actually processing. Okay, so those are the 3 steps. So processing the signal at the receptor level, you have to have an action potential, and it has to make it all the way to the brain or spinal cord, depending. That action potential that's getting passed is called a transduction, and it gets passed from one cell to the next. Then you have adaptation. This can be a change in sensitivity. If you keep sending the messages, you're going to become less responsive. because they keep sending the messages, so you're not going to respond in the same way. So there's different types of receptors. There's phasic receptors, which are fast adapting, and there's tonic receptors, which are slowly adapting. So the ones like pressure, touch, and smell are the fast ones, and then nociceptors and proprioceptors are slower responding. Okay, then at the circuit level, which is the middle, this is where it's going to reach the thalamus. You've got first order, second order, and third order sensory neurons. The first order is going to conduct it to spinal reflexes, and it might just stop there, and then you're going to have a motor response, which is what a reflex is. Sometimes those are conducted to second order, and then that can be transmitted to third order, and eventually it's going to make it to the processing part of your brain. So the processing at the perceptual level, that's the third level. Those are your interneurons that send it up there. And you could have perceptual detection where you are able to detect a stimulus. You need enough action potentials to reach there to actually add up to perceptual detection. There's also magnitude estimation. So how many, like what is the frequency of the impulses? How many times was that information sent? And then spatial discrimination is like how far apart in time or what kind of pattern is there when these action potentials were sent in. So all that's going to add up to how the signal is processed. There's feature abstraction too that allows you to identify things about the stimulus. Quality discrimination to look at is it sweet, is it sour, like what characteristics does it have, and then pattern recognition. Do you know, like, is there anything about it that is familiar? So all these things will add up together in processing. Okay, in perception of pain, the purpose of pain is important. It tells you that something's wrong. Tells you that there might be tissue damage or there already is tissue damage. It can be from extreme pressure, changes in temperature, can be from histamine, or some of these other things like too much potassium, ATP, acids, bradykinin. There's also substance P that's involved in pain. And then, so they make drugs that will block some of these pathways. So there's different people have a different tolerance to pain. So we all kind of perceive pain similarly, but we have different tolerance. If you're really sensitive, you have low tolerance, right? And that's going to affect how pain medications impact you too. So visceral pain is pain in your body, like from your organs. And it can be confusing because sometimes our pain is referred, meaning that we feel it in one place, but it's actually coming from another place. So for example, when you have left arm pain during a heart attack, that can be confusing because you think something's wrong with your arm, but it's actually your heart. So visceral pain can be confusing often because you don't know where it's coming from. So here's some different places where you will experience referred pain from visceral pain. There's also people who experience chronic pain, phantom limb pain. So there's a lot that can go into pain, and it's really hard to manage. Okay, then part 2. So this is the nerves transmitting the nerves transmitting the action potential. And remember, a nerve is what we use for the organs in the peripheral nervous system, the nerve cells. They can be myelinated or non-myelinated. And there's 2 types of nerves, spinal or cranial. Okay, so there's connective tissue. We've already learned these, but there's connective tissue around the nerve cells and nerve fibers, and so they're called endoneurium, that's the innermost, and then perineurium is the in-between, and then epineurium is on the outside. So here's a blood vessel, here's endoneurium, and then the next level is perineurium, and then epineurium is here on the outside. And then one chunk of it, a whole bunch together like a bunch of straws in a package, that's a fascicle wrapped by perineurium. And then each one is wrapped by endoneurium. So here it is again. You have your nerve fiber here. You have your endoneurium, your perineurium, and then your epineurium on the outside. And one chunk here, like one ponytail, is a fascicle. And then you have blood vessels that are supplying blood flow to them. There's different types of nerve fibers. There's that transmit messages. There's mixed, which are both sensory and motor. There's sensory, which is afferent, and motor, which is afferent. And we've learned about both of those. Well, yeah, both. Okay. And it's rare to just have pure sensory or pure motor. They're usually mixed. So these are some mixed ones: somatic afferent, somatic efferent, visceral afferent, visceral efferent. Ganglia are the little cell bodies that is the part that's not the tail, the part of the nerve fiber that just has mostly the cell body, the soma part. And there can be the root ganglia, which is sensory, or the autonomic ganglia, which is motor. Okay, and usually most neurons that are mature are amitotic, meaning they don't replicate, they don't make new nerve cells. If the soma, the cell body, is damaged, in general, in the peripheral nervous system, it might heal, might regenerate. In the central nervous system, it doesn't. So this is why they say when there's nerve damage, sometimes it doesn't heal. If someone's paralyzed, they're paralyzed forever. Okay, so central nervous system axons, for the most part, never regenerate. They're amitotic. The central nervous system oligodendrocytes do sometimes heal, like so the myelin sheaths sort of around the nerve heals. Astrocytes can form scar tissue, but the nerve itself doesn't regenerate. Peripheral nervous systems might regenerate. And some of this is new, and they're finding new things. So maybe they can stimulate regeneration in the central nervous system someday. But right now, axon fragments and myelin sheaths distal to the injury, so like further down from the injury, are going to degenerate. Macrophages are going to clean up the debris. And then the axon filaments can regenerate and reform. So that can happen if it's not too severe. So here's a picture of that. The Schwann cells are out here. You have little droplets of myelin, fragmented axon. It's going to get cleaned up. And then you have these little Schwann cells here covering it up, macrophages eating dead stuff, and then now you have new axons forming. And then you have a new myelin sheath forming around it. So that's what happens with peripheral, but not central nervous system.